The invisible death, Crow, and the Great Plague, the rising sun over Europe in the year 1348, was no longer a sign of hope, but a herald of new bodies, to be added to the mass grave. The streets were so silent that you could only hear the dust dragging in the wind, and the distant creaking of wooden wheels. History books record this era as the Black Death. But within this great darkness, there was a mysterious man, whose mask remains etched in memories, even today. Everyone called him the Crow. He was neither a saint nor an ordinary doctor. Crow was an alchemist who sought the secrets in the heart of nature and tried to understand the world through the essences of plants. Today, I will tell you the story of this mysterious man and his relentless struggle against the greatest disaster in human history. Do you think a single person can create a miracle in those moments of horror, when the whole world feels like it is ending? Or is the greatest heroism sometimes simply trying to stay alive? Crow's story began in the narrow, dark, and damp streets of Florence, infested with rats. At that time, the world was much smaller, and medical science was still in its infancy. While people sought healing in star charts or frescoes on church walls, Crow was locked in his laboratory, examining plant roots, rare flowers, and poisonous mushrooms. He was an alchemist. For him, the world was a combination of elements and scents. When the plague first arrived in the city, no one took the small disasters filtering from the holds of ships at the harbor seriously. While the ships carried silken spices from the east, they also brought with them the invisible enemy that would bring the end of humanity. When the first mass deaths began, Crow started to watch the other so-called doctors in the city. They were arrogant but helpless men who thought they knew what they were doing. They went to desperate patients, pressed frogs onto those huge swellings on their bodies, and waited for the planets in the sky to align. Their most common and deadly method was bloodletting. They tore people's veins with lancets, believing that dirty blood would throw the disease out of the body. Every drop of blood flowing from those lancets was actually a bloody bridge carrying death from one body to another. Crow, watching this ignorance, would be the first person to realize that the enemy was not a curse, but an invisible scent and contact. On that very day, Crow designed the crow-like mask that has become the symbol of horror today. This was not a fashion choice. It was a professional suit of armor built with his own hands against absolute death. Crow coated the leather with heavy layers of beeswax so that the disease would not seep through the pores of the skin and reach his body. He did not make that long and curved beak just to look scary. As an alchemist, he filled the inside of that beak with nature's strongest line of defense. Dried cloves, crushed amber, fresh mint, camphor, and wormwood. Every time Crow took a breath, he was not breathing a scent of decay from outside, but the protective and sharp spirit of the plant. He put on leather gloves that reached his elbows and took a heavy cloak washed with vinegar. The moment he first put that mask on his face, Crow was no longer an ordinary man. Not it? He was now a living shadow. The people of the city screamed and ran when they saw him in the street. Because this mask was not just a doctor's uniform, it was like physical evidence of the approaching Grim Reaper. Crow walked alone in the streets, poking the corpses on the ground with his long cane and checking who was still breathing. While other doctors walked unprotected in the midst of filth and disease, Crow was safe inside his own artificial dome. However, this protective shield was also his spiritual prison. The moment he put on the mask, all ties with humanity were broken. No one could look into his eyes. No one could hold his hand. Crow had left behind everything he loved, even his own identity, focusing only on fighting this invisible monster. Do you think that if the thing that protects a person also cuts them off from the whole world, is it really a salvation? Crow asked himself this question every night as he stepped through the empty and dark street. When the city administration gave all authority to Crow in desperation, he began to implement the harshest and most ruthless decisions in history. The word quarantine was not in anyone's vocabulary back then. However, when Crow watched nature and the spread of the disease with the eyes of an alchemist, he noticed that death progressed like a chain. The only way to break this chain was to separate the links completely. When he saw a single symptom of disease in a house, he had the door of that house sealed from the outside with huge planks of wood. The screams inside are still ringing in my ears. Watching healthy children left to die with their dying mothers was not a burden that could fit in a human conscience. Crow was trying to save a neighborhood by sacrificing a house, and an entire city by sacrificing a neighborhood. No one saw the tears flowing under his mask while making these decisions, because the world only knew him through that fixed, emotionless, and metallic-eyed Crow mouth. Crow's struggle was not only against an invisible disease, but also against a deep ignorance. While other healers in the city were still looking for solutions with amulets, magical stones, and meaningless prayers, Crow shouted the cleansing power of vinegar and fire to the whole city. As an alchemist, he understood that nature had to be cleaned. By the time he realized that the plague could be stopped not with plants or magic, but only with distance and absolute cleanliness, more than half of Europe's population had already returned to the earth. Cities turned into ghost towns, fields were left unclaimed. But Crow did not stop. In the sleepless nights he spent in his laboratory, he drew secret maps proving that the disease actually started from ports and trade routes. He implemented the rule of keeping ships waiting at open sea for 40 days, which is the modern quarantine in its harshest form. So, how did this great horror end? People thought it was a miracle. Some said the alignment of the planets in the sky changed, that God finally gave up his wrath. But we know that this happened thanks to the ruthless isolation, rules implemented by Crow, and a few brave men like him. The plague was not actually completely defeated, it just became unable to find new bodies to feed on. Nature had done its own savage cleaning, making those who remained more resilient and stronger. The Black Death did not only kill people, it also radically burned and destroyed that rotten and decayed system of the Middle Ages. And from that great pain, from those huge ashes, the Renaissance, the golden age of humanity, began to be born. Pain had brought a great transformation with it. Crow finally took that heavy mask off his face, for the last time when the plague left the city. No one was running away from him in the streets anymore, but he was no longer the old Crow either. The man he saw when he looked in the mirror carried the weight of thousands of sealed doors and thousands of souls left to die. Perhaps he was not applauded as a hero. Perhaps he was only remembered as a fairy tale figure that frightened children. But in those dark streets, dancing with death with only the scent of lavender and a lantern about to go out in his hand, this man was a hidden genius who laid the foundations of today's modern medicine. His courage had lit a candle in the darkest hour of humanity. Do you think that if we faced a similar disaster today, we could show Crow's iron discipline and unwavering courage? Or would we succumb to our fears again, despite our modern technologies? If you were in those dark streets of Florence that day, would you be the one carrying that torch beside Crow, or one of the desperate ones waiting for a miracle in the houses whose doors were sealed? Thank you for walking with me on this long and dusty road in this darkest page of history. Do you think Crow was a savior or a monster created by necessities? I am very curious to share your thoughts about this story and your ethical ideas about Crow's dilemmas in the comments. Let's decide together which dark corner of history we will illuminate in our next story. If you enjoyed the video, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. But if you didn't like it, feel free to hit that dislike button. Just make sure to leave a comment and tell me why so I can improve. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.